Mark and I have some facts about geese that can give us a few lessons about our life together, courtesy of Reverend David Abbott.
It has been learned that as each bird flaps its wings, it creates uplift for the bird immediately following. By flying in a V formation, the whole flock adds at least 71% greater flying range than if each bird flew on its own.
Lesson: when we share a common direction and a sense of community, we can get where we are going more quickly and easily because we are traveling on the thrust and uplift of each other.
Whenever a goose falls out of formation, it suddenly feels the drag and resistance of trying to go it alone and quickly gets back into formation to take advantage of the lifting power of the bird immediately in front.
Lesson: if we have the sense of a goose, we will stay in formation with those who are headed the same way we are going.
When the lead goose gets tired, it rotates back in the wing and another goose flies up to the front.
Lesson: it pays to take turns doing hard jobs with others.
The geese honk from behind to encourage those up front to keep up their speed.
Lesson: we too might honk from behind. It is probably best if we honk encouragement.
When a goose falls sick or is wounded, say by a gunshot, and falls out, 2 geese fall out of formation and follow it down to help and protect it. They stay with the weakened goose until it is able to fly or until it is dead, and then they launch out on their own or with another formation to catch up with their original group.
Lesson: if we can stand by each other like that in our church community, people will be lining up to become members. The small town of Potsdam, New York, where I grew up, lives in my memory as the ideal community. It was a community much like the one Richard Louv describes in the reading. It had everything I needed and nothing I didn't. A town of about 7,000 in the almost unknown region of extremely northern New York State. Potsdam was, for me, for a long time, the center of the universe. The Racket River runs through the center of town, and Ives Park downtown, there you could go swimming or ice skating, depending on the weather. In the summer, there was an ice cream social outside the Civic Center. With 2 four-year colleges, it was not so small a town that everybody knew everybody's business. And we had music and culture through the colleges and ice hockey. We also had great community theater. I felt connected to a network of friends and acquaintances who were themselves all connected to each other in some way. Since leaving Potsdam, I have lived in a lot of places, but mainly a couple of other small towns, a mid-sized city, and 3 large metropolitan areas. That's all before coming to Pittsburgh. In the small towns, I quickly found myself embedded in a network of friends and acquaintances who knew each other. In the metropolitan areas, in particular of Washington and Chicago, I quickly became lost. People work in one locale and live in another. I never ran into people I worked with at the grocery store. And when I would go into bars in my younger years, I noticed that in the metropolitan areas, people sit and talk only with the people they came in with, whereas in the small towns, everybody interacted with each other. At some point, when I was in the Chicago suburbs, I realized that the lack of community was a problem for me, but I didn't know what to do about it. Then I started going to the Unitarian Universalist Church. I originally went to find new ways to nourish my spirituality, but was delighted and a little surprised to find that here was also a place I could find that sense of community that had been lacking in my life so much in the big metropolitan area. Community has long been undervalued in our society because individualism is our heritage. It is the flavor of this American nation, and especially of this Unitarian Universalist denomination. The founding of our nation and the liberal religion that arose at the same time both have their roots in the Enlightenment, and both are characterized by its highly individualistic view of the human self. It was our own Ralph Waldo Emerson who was the philosophical champion of individualism, saying things like, "Insist on yourself, never imitate." He believed people should act from their own inner wisdom, tossing the laws, the books, idolatries, and customs out of the window. He preached nonconformity and independence from European culture, and our young nation ate it up. For 200 years, this strong individualism has been the predominant worldview of our country and our religion. But of late, there has been a shift in thought that it is not the individual that is the primary unit of human society, but the community. A self is not an isolated being, but is defined only through its relationships. The group comes first. We are formed by the lives that intersect ours. There is no individuality without community. So our cultural value of independence actually works against our basic nature, which is interdependent. The reality of our interdependent nature and our need for connection was brought home to me by an article about addiction titled, "The Likely Cause of Addiction Has Been Discovered, and It Is Not What You Think." The author, Johann Hari, tells of an experiment that was long used to prove the addictive nature of certain drugs. He says, put a rat in a cage alone with 2 water bottles. One is just water. The other is water laced with heroin or cocaine. Almost every time you run this experiment, the rat will become obsessed with the drugged water and keep coming back for more and more until it kills itself. This experiment established the belief that addiction was inevitable given the nature of certain drugs. But then a professor noticed something odd about this experiment. He says the rat is put in the cage all alone. It has nothing to do but take the drugs. What would happen, he wondered, if we tried this differently? So the professor designed Rat Park. It's a lush cage where the rats have colored balls and the best rat food and tunnels to scamper down and plenty of friends. Everything a rat about town could want. What he wanted to know will happen then. In Rat Park, all the rats obviously tried both water bottles because they didn't know what was in them. But what happened next was startling. The rats with good lives didn't like the drugged water. They mostly shunned it, consuming less than a quarter of the drugs the isolated rats used. None of them died, while all the rats who were alone and unhappy became heavy users. None of the rats who had a happy environment did. There are studies of humans as well, of soldiers being addicted to heroin in Vietnam and no longer needing the drugs once they got home. And then medical patients using heroin in the hospital, but no longer needing it at home. Hari concludes that addiction isn't due to the drug itself, but to the environment. He says The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. It is human connection. Let me repeat that. It is human connection. It is connection that can keep us from succumbing to addiction. It is connection to other people that keeps us happy, healthy, and alive. We are realizing this more than ever now in this time of isolation. We are realizing just how essential we all are to each other so that we can eat, so that we can get the health care we need, so that we can give our care to others. Our human existence truly is, as Martin Luther King Jr. says, a network of mutuality. Our very nature is interdependent, and we need to be in community in order to thrive. But a genuine community is more than a collection of individuals. A genuine community is not found, but created. It offers tremendous rewards, but it is also work, and it can involve pain and sacrifice. Many of us have a tendency to sentimentalize community. We tend to lift up the promise of personal nurture that community offers and forget or ignore its challenges. In a thread on the minister's chat list a while back, the value of homeschooling was weighed against the value of being in a true community where you don't get to pick those you associate with, where you come into contact and even conflict with the school bully and others. There was a recognition among the ministers that as much as we'd like to protect our children from such experiences, we also wish them to have the learning that comes from precisely such experiences. And increasingly these days, the communities we associate with are in cyberspace, especially now, but even before the shutdown happened. And these communities are unlike geographical communities in that they are very selective. They consist of people who have the same interests or think alike on important issues. For example, my sister is a knitter and belongs to an online group for knitters called Ravelry. Within this group, there are subgroups, and she's in one for lovers of orange cats. She spends a lot of time with them and has even met some of them in person, though they don't live near each other. By dwelling in such communities of like-minded people, though, we no longer bump up against people who challenge us to see things a different way. And in spending our time with these pseudo-communities, we are becoming more dissatisfied with our local flesh and blood communities. A genuine community is not made up of just our friends or people like us. To be a true community, it must be diverse and inclusive. Everybody must be welcome just as they are. Much of the challenge of being in community comes from the need to honor everyone's needs, while yet not letting any individual's needs outweigh the health of the whole community. In a genuine community, a healthy community, we are able to be ourselves fully with all our needs and quirks and personalities, and yet at the same time, we're able to subsume our individuality into the whole. To the extent that we can let our own needs be subservient to the greater good, to that extent we are enlarged. We take on a greater purpose, a purpose greater than our own survival or that of our family. Community challenges us, and it changes us. and it asks that we make a commitment. When I first went to Midland, Michigan, I went now and then to the contra dances that happened 2 Saturday nights a month. I missed them often when my sermon wasn't finished on time. Then I realized that the dances provided an important community for me outside the congregation, and I needed to make them a priority. I worked them into my schedule and became a regular. When I became aware of a need to help run them, I started showing up early. And when I became aware of a need for another caller, I applied myself to learning how to call dances. I realized that the more I put into it, the more I got out of it. A church community or congregation is much like that dance community. We can just attend and enjoy programs that others create, but the real value only comes when we make a commitment and become an active member of the community, prepared to stick with it even if it gets difficult, or I should say, even when it gets difficult, because it inevitably will, if you're committed enough. But the more you put in, the more you get out. Without a certain level of commitment, we aren't able to hang in there through the pain of conflict, to work through to the rewards that follow. We create community. We weave the invisible strands of community by being there for each other, by making a commitment to a community and participating in it wholeheartedly in the good times and in the tough times, when we can meet in person and when we can't, when we get our own way and when we don't, when we feel included and even when we don't. In every relationship, and so in every community, conflict is inevitable. What distinguishes a healthy community is its ability to resolve conflict. In his book, A Different Drum, M. Scott Peck says that the reason a healthy community can resolve conflict without resort to physical or emotional bloodshed is that its members have laid down their weapons and their armor, have become skilled at listening and understanding. They respect each other's gifts and accept each other's limitations. They celebrate their differences and bind each other's wounds. They are committed to struggling together rather than against each other. In community, we bump up against others who see things differently than we do, who have their own way of getting things done, or whose needs conflict with ours. The bumping sometimes hurts, but in the process, there is opportunity for growth. If we keep ourselves apart to avoid getting hurt, or leave when things aren't to our liking, we deprive ourselves of the challenges of community, which are where the growth is found. If we keep ourselves from committed engagement, we deprive ourselves of those challenges, and so also of the rewards. And the rewards are great. Peck says the most common thing he hears from members of groups that have achieved community is, "I feel safe here." To feel truly safe, to be ourselves, is a rare and valuable thing. We are fed by the caring, listening, acceptance, and understanding that a community can provide, and it only works if we feed others too. And here's a well-known story that makes that point. A holy man was having a conversation with the Lord one day and said, "Lord, I would like to know what heaven and hell are like." So the Lord led the man to 2 doors. He opened one of the doors, and the holy man looked in. In the middle of the room was a large table, a round table. And in the middle of this table was a large pot of stew, which smelled delicious and made the holy man's mouth water. The people sitting around the table were thin and sickly. They appeared to be famished. They were holding spoons with very long handles that were strapped to their arms, and each found it possible to reach the pot of stew and take a spoonful. But because the handle was longer than their arms, they could not get that spoon back to their mouths. The holy man shuddered at the sight of their misery and suffering. The Lord said, "You have seen hell." Well, then they went to the next room, and they opened that door. It was exactly like the first one. There was the large round table with a large pot of stew, which made the holy man's mouth water. The people were equipped with the same long-handled spoons. But here, the people were well-nourished and plump, laughing and talking. The holy man said, "I don't understand." "It is simple," said the Lord. "It requires but one skill. You see, they have learned to feed each other." We here at the UU Church of the North Hills are lucky. A congregation is one of the few forms of intergenerational community left in America. It is a covenantal community. Here we have all the ingredients for a healthy, thriving, inclusive community that transforms lives. Just remember, the more you put in, the more you get out. And remember the lessons of the geese. When we share a common direction and a sense of community, we can get where we are going more quickly and easily because we are traveling on the thrust and uplift of each other. If we have the sense of a goose, we will stay in formation with those who are headed the same way we are going. And it pays to take turns doing hard jobs with others. And we too might honk from behind, and it's probably best if we honk encouragement. And if we can stand by each other like that in our congregation, people will be lining up to become members. Our dear Emerson, individualist that he is, also says, "We are not born free, but with a mortgage. That mortgage is a debt that we owe to the past and to the future. While we live, we pay interest and then pass it on to the next generation. That's how churches, communities, and nations survive, by accepting what has been bequeathed and passing it on to those who come after them. This ritual of receiving and giving is an act of thanksgiving. Our community is one that exists not just for us here and now, but is extended through time, both past and future. It is our responsibility here and now to ensure the health and continuity of this religious community, even as it feeds us and contributes to our own health and well-being. If we pay attention to the lessons of the geese, we can fly together. I'll honk encouragement to you, and I'll listen for your honks of encouragement to each other. Honk, honk.